Good afternoon, enthusiasts, and listen, Minnesota is better than Wisconsin. I hear this debate all the time, and for me, it's no contest. I mean, Minnesota is home to so many great things, like Split Rock Lighthouse, Mall of America, and most importantly, the cherry on the spoon. I mean, really, what does Wisconsin have that's better than Minnesota? Let's look it up. Alright, it says here that Green Bay is the toilet paper capital of the world. They got that going for them. America's largest dairyland. No duh, Sherlock. Oh, they have a wooden coaster that goes underground. Oh, and it has an inversion.
Hades 360. It's known for being a coaster that goes under a parking lot. It's known for being a wooden coaster with an inversion. It's known for being the first ever Gravity Group coaster. And it's one of the most unique wooden coasters in the entire world. In my opinion, it's an elite wooden coaster, and it's arguably the best coaster in Wisconsin. I don't know, I've heard that Zip and Pippin is pretty good, but Hades 360 is definitely a contender for one of the best wooden coasters in the entire nation. And even though it has some issues, it still is a wonderful ride, and as of right now, it's my number one. But before we go any further, we need to go back, all the way back to the 1990s. During this decade, roller coaster technology was rapidly evolving. There were so many first of its kind roller coasters coming out, and on top of that, this was smack dab in the middle of the coaster wars. And because of these reasons, roller coasters back then got a ton of media coverage, which made roller coasters more popular. So, because roller coasters were becoming more popular, small parks in the US who initially didn't have a roller coaster yet, finally got their first ever roller coaster in this decade. And one of those parks was Mount Olympus. Prior to the 1990s, Mount Olympus was primarily a go-kart park with lots of go-kart tracks, even today, so this roller coaster was a big deal for them. Their first roller coaster came in 1995, and that was Cyclops, and it was built by CCI. This roller coaster was short, but it was definitely a good ride because in the back row, the ejector airtime on this thing is incredible, and it was quite unique, at least back then. 1 year later though, Mount Olympus called back CCI to make yet another coaster for them, and that was Pegasus in 1996. This roller coaster was definitely a step down from Cyclops though. It was much smaller and overall not as good. Mount Olympus calls this their family coaster, but me personally, I call this thing the evil chiropractor. This coaster is just so boring and rough. It breaks your spine. And that turn into the station will break your neck. But 1 year later, after the abomination known as Pegasus, Mount Olympus yet again ordered a CCI coaster called Zeus. This thing was taller, faster, and longer than Cyclops, and it was so much smoother than Pegasus. This out and back coaster has some solid airtime, and it's very similar to Timber Terror at Silverwood, but it's overall a really good ride. But then it's the early 2000s, and Mount Olympus kinda slows down on their coasters a little bit. Their first new coaster for the 2000s came in 2004, and that was Dive to Atlantis, which was a roller coaster slash log flume attraction built by Ian F. Miller. This one was really cool, but it was so unreliable and it broke down constantly, and it was removed in 2007. During this time though, there was something missing from this park, and that was a standout roller coaster. I mean, sure, there's Dive to Atlantis, but that was barely open. So the park really needs a standout attraction, so they were thinking about a taller, faster, and longer wooden coaster for the 2005 season. But there was one little problem, and that was CCI. You see, Mount Olympus and CCI had a very strong relationship with each other. But in 2002, CCI went bankrupt, so that was not an option anymore. But there was a solution. You see, after CCI went bankrupt, the lead designers and employees started their own company called the Gravity Group. And they were looking to build their first ever roller coaster under this new company. So naturally, Mount Olympus saw Gravity Group as the next generation of CCI. So the job was handed to Gravity Group to make Mount Olympus one spectacular standout coaster. This new roller coaster was going to be quite ambitious. It was going to have a pre-lift section, it was going to have a steeper drop, and most importantly, it was going to go under the parking lot, being the first wooden coaster in the world to do so. That's very impressive, especially for a company's first ever roller coaster. You see, most companies, when they have their first coaster, they usually play it safe. They don't go super crazy with their first coaster because they're not comfortable with that. But then we have Gravity Group, and they're like, you know what? Let's have our first ever coaster project go under a freaking parking lot. Gravity Group seems really ambitious, even today. Like, if you want a roller coaster that goes to the moon and back, ask Gravity Group, they'll probably do it for you. Anyways, in 2005, the construction was complete and Hades was open to the public. It got the attention of roller coaster enthusiasts from all over the country, and suddenly, all of them were flocking to Mount Olympus just to ride this thing. The ride was pretty great. It ran PTC trains though, but still, it was pretty great. It was definitely the standout coaster that Mount Olympus needed, but there was one slight issue. You see, because this roller coaster was tall and fast, and most of the elements were low to the ground, or underground, the roller coaster had a lot of wear and tear on the track, more so than the other ones, so every few years, Gravity Group would come in and retrack it. But then we come to 2013, and by this time, Gravity Group is a well-established wooden coaster manufacturer, with hits like the Voyage at Holiday World. They were about to come in and retrack Hades once again, but then Mount Olympus was like, you know what? I'm bored. Let's have an inversion on the turnaround. How about that, I mean, it was more than possible for Gravity Group. Gravity Group was already experimenting with inversions on their coasters, so they were up for the challenge. So, for 2013, Hades 360 got an upgrade with a corkscrew inversion, an overbank turn, and also Timberliner trains. So, that summer season, Hades 360 opened to the public with that fancy new corkscrew and overbank turn replacing the turnaround. And this was big news because a wooden coaster with an inversion was magical back then. This was before RMC did their fancy tricks on their wooden coasters. Hades 360 was the first successful wooden coaster to have an inversion.
You see, Hades 360 was not the first wooden coaster to have an inversion. It wasn't even second. The first example was Flip Flap Railway in 1895. This roller coaster was impressive for its time, but it had one major flaw, and that was the G-force. You see, this was back during the Peach Fuzz era of roller coaster design, and designers really didn't know what the term G-force was, so this coaster pulled 12 Gs, which I'm no doctor, but I'm pretty sure that's bad. So after the failure of Flip Flap Railway, it took 100 plus years for a wooden coaster to have an inversion, and that came in the year 2000 with Son of Beast. Now, this coaster fixed the G-force issue, but there's still one problem, and that was Son of Beast sucked, like really bad. It was a maintenance nightmare, it broke down constantly, and sometimes, later years, the train couldn't even make it through the loop, so the loop was removed, and eventually, in 2009, the whole coaster was demolished. So now we're at Hades 360, and this was a big deal because it was the first successful inversion on a wooden coaster. Before RMC did all their fancy tricks on their wooden coasters, Hades 360 was the world's first wooden coaster to have a successful inversion. Alright, so that was a brief history of Hades 360's history. Now, the question still remains, is this roller coaster actually good or not? Well, we're gonna find out because now I'm going to review this coaster based off my experience and my opinion, so let's get into it. Alright, let's first talk about the name. And the name Hades 360, well, it's fine. Look, I get why they call it Hades 360. It's because the inversion is 360 degrees, whoop-de-doo. This roller coaster, when it first opened, was called Hades, and that made perfect sense because in Greek mythology, Hades was a god of the underworld, and that makes perfect sense for a coaster that goes underground. I mean, Hades 360 is not a bad name by any means, but it's not really the greatest. I would really prefer if Mount Olympus just calls this Hades. Come on, just plain Hades is a great name. It's 2 syllables and it sounds awesome. Hades 360, again, it's fine, but I'm not really the biggest fan of this name, but that's a minor nitpick. Let's move on to the coaster's trains, and ooh la la. These are the Gravity Group Timberliner trains, and they're absolutely amazing. In fact, these are probably one of the best wooden coaster trains in the entire world. They're super comfortable, and instead of the lap bar coming down on you, it goes around you, which I think is genius because it's really hard to get stapled on this ride. And that is really good news because Hades has some really good airtime. So after you dispatch, the train will go into a pre-lift section, and what's really surprising is that on the first little drop out of the station, you will get airtime, and it was pretty weird because I didn't expect that to happen, but it did, and it was fun. The rest of the pre-lift section though is kind of mediocre. Not a whole lot of airtime, but it's still really cool. There's a double down, there's a few turns, but after that you hit the chain lift and you go up 136 feet off the ground. And this drop is pretty steep for a wooden coaster. I believe it's about 65 degrees or something like that, but anyways, it's pretty steep, and the drop itself is 140 feet, and it'll send you at a top speed of 60 miles per hour. This drop has some really good airtime throughout the train. You would not be disappointed with this drop. It is so fun. After that drop, you are thrown straight into the tunnel, and this tunnel is filled to the brim with bunny hills that have some pretty good airtime. I don't really know exactly what's all in the tunnel because A, it's really dark in there, you can't really see anything, and B, this thing roars in the tunnel, like it is loud. The screams and the wooden coaster sounds combined in a tunnel underground makes this coaster very loud. But in my opinion, this is probably the most intense part of the ride because it's noisy in there, it's pitch black, and the airtime is absolutely bonkers. If you love airtime and intensity, there is without doubt you will love this part of the ride. After that, you rise up into Hades 360's signature element, the corkscrew inversion and overbank turn. So the corkscrew inversion is actually really cool considering it's on a wooden coaster, but there's no hang time and it's not the most memorable thing out there, but still, it's very fun to do, and that overbank turn is also pretty good. I would say this is probably the most fun part of the ride, if that makes any sense. It's not super intense, but it's still very fun to pull off. Following that, we go up an airtime hill that gives us some beautiful, sustained floater airtime all the way down into the tunnel. And once again, this tunnel is very intense. It's pitch black and it's very noisy. There's a few turns in there and the airtime is absolutely out of this world. It is amazing, guys. Following that, we reach broad daylight and we go up a hill and do a double down. And this double down has some really good airtime, especially in the back row. The front is okay, but if you want the best airtime on this double down, in fact the best airtime on this coaster in general, you definitely want to be in the back row. After that, we go up into a turn, and this turn has some really good laterals because the train is still hauling through the layout. And there's more turns, and all these turns kind of wrap around the pre-lift section, and it goes back into the woods a little bit, which I think is spectacular. After that is a brief airtime pop before entering the upward helix, and this helix is not forceful at all. In fact, the train slows down a little bit on this helix, but that's okay because the brakes are right after that, ending your ride on this epic journey on Hades 360. Overall, I think Hades 360 is a world-class wooden roller coaster. It's so awesome, but it's not perfect. So now I'm going to go over a few things that I just didn't like about Hades 360. Let's first talk about operations. Now, Hades 360 only has one train, so that's already an issue because I think Hades 360 can at least have 2 trains because I think there's enough block zones for that. Not entirely sure about that, so go ahead and fact check me if you want. But yeah, one train is not super good, especially on busy days. And there's only 2 operators on this platform. In reality, there should be 3. This issue is not really Hades 360's fault, it's more of a park decision to have 1 train and only 2 operators, so this issue does not take away from the ride experience at all. That's just me nitpicking. Now, the actual problem that most people have with this roller coaster is that in the back row, it can be rough. It's not really a super bad rough, it's not bumpy at all, it's just that the back row has a bit of a rattle to it. Like, my first 2 rides on this roller coaster were in the very back row, and while the airtime was amazing, after 2 rides, I had a headache. I mean, the airtime is fun, but this roller coaster has a bite to it. So, as a result, Hades 360 is kind of a hard roller coaster to marathon, because after 2 rides in the back, I need a break. So those are my small gripes with Hades 360. Now, if you want a much smoother experience, the front row is definitely much smoother. The airtime isn't as good, but it's still a very smooth ride experience. To sum this all up, Hades 360 is a top tier wooden coaster for me. The airtime is nuts, the tunnel is intense, and the inversion is just so fun. This coaster can be rough, yes, but looking past that, it's still an elite wooden coaster. Okay, I think I'm done here, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and yeah, peace out.